Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. We have an amazing guest today. Her name is Octavia Goredema. She's the host of the Audible original series, How to Change Careers, and she's also the author of Prep Push Pivot. She's a noted career coach and author based in LA, and she's made taken numerous risks to find success. And I'm really excited to ask her about what those risks were and also what the payoffs were. We know what some of those payoffs were if you've checked out Octavia's LinkedIn, but we're going to find out some more juicy details. She's working with some insane companies. She's been working with Google, American Airlines, Tinder, General Motors, and Nike. And the people that have published her work, also phenomenal. She's been in Fortune, CNN, Fast Company, Harvard Business Review, Los Angeles Times. I'm running out of fingers. The Guardian, Black Enterprise, among others, have worked with Octavia. And she's even co-hosted a cool show called HBR Now, which essentially is Harvard Business Review's weekly show about leadership. And she's providing group workshops, one-to-one coaching to improve people's lives. Let's get to it. Octavia, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great today. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I've been really excited to have you on. What's going on in your life, Octavia? Tell me about what you've been up to.
Oh, my goodness. Well, as you mentioned, I'm the host of a new Audible series called How to Change Careers. It was released earlier this summer. It was such a full circle moment for me as a career coach, but also a career changer myself. If you'd have told me that I'd end up sharing my journey of changing my career with Audible's audience, I don't think I'd ever have believed you at the outset. And it was just a reminder that you never know where your journey will take you. But it's really important to find the courage to pursue what really matters to you.
So I came across you from your book, Prep Push Pivot,
Uh-huh.
and you're in when I remember looking at LinkedIn and seeing it blowing up because you were just like in loads of bookstores and libraries and people were like displaying your books. I don't know, if you were doing signings, but there was lots of social
Yes, I
activities.
was.
And what I was thinking is when you wrote the book, were you like, okay, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to help some people, and I'm going to publish it, and I'm going to go to place X, Y, and Z. Did this all kind of explode, or was this the plan?
Um, I knew I wanted to be an author. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I certainly had no idea what the outcome would be. And even the bookstores that you referenced that you saw posts about or the signings, which I still do. I try and make a habit of visiting at least one, if I can, two bookstores a month. But no, I had no idea any of that would happen. Just the idea that my book could be in one bookstore blew my mind.
It's amazing.
So, but I'd wanted to be an author, Chris, for as long as I can remember. As a little kid, just loved all the famous five books by Enid Blyton and the Roald Dahl books, and just constantly reading and dreamt of being an author of fiction stories, actually, because that's what I loved growing up. And then just slowly over time convinced myself I wasn't good enough without any good reason, really,
Mm.
and gave up on that. And then eventually, and it took me many decades, I just, and after a failed attempt at writing, because my book's, it sits in the business book section. It's a career development guide for underrepresented women, and it draws on my work as a career coach on all the key scenarios that you might face as you're trying to prepare for the next stage in your career or push forwards for that next step or maybe make a pivot. Um, After a failed attempt at a different book earlier, many years later, I was just like, no, I just want to see what could happen if I don't give up this time. And if when things get difficult or I'm not sure what to do next, that I reach for help or try something differently versus stopping. And it was literally that ethos that has moved me through each of the markers of becoming an author, from writing the book proposal to finding an agent to that my agent finding my publisher to walking through the process of closing a deal and then producing a 50,000 word manuscript, and then what you saw, which is what comes after all of that, what you have to do once you're bringing a book into the world in terms of making people aware that it exists. I had no clue what I was doing. Not at all. I'd never done this before. So no, I wish I could tell you there was a master plan. There was not.
And your Audible series came after that, right?
Yes.
And you talk about, I think it was is it 5 stages to change your career?
Yeah, there's 5 episodes in the
5 episodes.
series, and
7 steps?
I walk through seven steps, and I'm able to share the 7 key steps with the benefit of hindsight, because when I was first going through my own pivot, or the first of anything that you might want to do, even if you're not necessarily changing careers, but you're reaching for something you haven't done before, you're feeling it out, and if you're smart, you'll talk to people who have done it before, but their journey might not be identical to yours, even if they're doing exactly the same thing as you. And in the example that you're sharing about becoming an author for the first time with my book, Prep, Push, Pivot, I talked to tons of authors about certain things that I was trying to figure out, whichever point I was in that journey. And it was super helpful. But your journey is unique to you, and you can compare yourself to other people, sometimes in a helpful way, but sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not where that person is at, or that's not going to play out the same way for me. And that can feel discouraging, but what you have to do is kind of flip that and say, okay, even if it's not going to be identical, any step I make is going to be helpful for me, and any obstacle that stalls me, it's what I do next that matters, or what I learn from it. And there's so much that I overcame, and I'm still overcoming, that I'm incredibly proud of, that isn't visible to anyone else, because that's the stuff that didn't stop me completely. It's the stuff that I pushed through.
Absolutely. And what were those kind of key challenges for you that where you encountered them, you're like, I need to just keep moving forward?
Oh, so many. When you're sharing your work, whether that's putting your resume together and applying for a job, or in my case, writing a book proposal and hoping someone will like it, there's so much uncertainty that goes into that, because you're literally showing up as your true self. You're showing what you can do. You're showing your ideas. You're showing perhaps your accomplishments if it's your resume. And the rejection that you might get along the way can sting, because whatever you're reaching for matters for you. And so when I first was hearing no's about my book proposal, which is like a 70-page document which outlines what your book will be about, who you are, why you're a great person to write this book, and then has some samples of your work and of the book that you want to write within it, it's kind of heartbreaking. It's like, and sometimes the reasons aren't about the quality of the writing. It could be about, you're not the right person for this, or I don't feel this is a strong enough idea. And feedback is helpful, but you can't let it stop you. And so I had to dig a little deeper and just keep putting my work out there. And I'm so glad I did, because eventually a no might turn into a maybe or yes. And you won't know if you've held yourself back. And then there's, once you get that opportunity, it's like, okay, oh my gosh, now I've got to deliver. Okay. Now I've got to actually meet the deadlines or impress someone in a meeting if it's, an introduction. And so every step there's a next and a next and a next. And so you're constantly moving out of a comfort zone when you're doing something that you haven't done before. And it can feel intimidating when it matters to you. So constantly, I mean, you talk about the bookstores. I was too afraid to go to bookstores for the longest time, Chris.
Really?
I was afraid to, after my book came out.
Why?
Yes.
What, for the advertising of your book?
Yeah. Like, first of all, it's like, well, first of all, is my book going to be there? Like, and then what do? I didn't know what you're supposed to write in a book when you're signing it. I had to ask other authors and things like that.
Good reading.
So there was there's so many things that are firsts. There's
what did
so
you write
many
in the first
things.
one?
I think I just signed my name, and then and that's totally fine. You can just sign your name. But then I realized, no, I want to like have a standard thing that I put that's
Yeah,
like personal to me. So the way that I close out my emails is actually how I sign my books. And then it's different if you're signing it for someone who stood in front of you and you're adding their name and maybe a more personalized message for that person. So
yeah.
that can help too. But the first time you're doing it, it just feels so surreal. And it's the same with so many things. You know, the first after you've perhaps achieved a promotion and then you're actually going into your first meeting to lead your team, you know, that's an unknown for you. Maybe if you're decided like I did that you're going to leave the UK and move somewhere else for your career, the first time that you make that decision and start applying for roles that maybe in a different country or a different city, that will feel unusual for you. So we all face firsts in different ways, but I'm continue to be surprised and just amazed by where this journey has taken me. And I didn't know what would come from it. But I just made a decision that I wanted to enjoy it all and embrace it all as much as I could. And that's something that I still adhere to.
Amazing. It sounds like it's been quite a journey for you,
Yes.
and it was a lot of the unexpected to but good things that were unexpected. I would never have considered what do I write in a book if someone comes to actually ask me to sign it. I probably would have done the exact same thing and just put my signature and gone, oh, I should have maybe. But that's good advice for anyone who's coming to go into a book signing, I guess, is like have a think about what you want to signed in there, and then maybe mention it to the person who's signing it. I know a good friend of mine, a guy I used to work with called Tom. He met the Gus Fring from Breaking Bad,
Oh,
and
wow, that's amazing.
yeah, and he told him what his favorite line was in the whole series, and he was like, I love
Yes.
this part that you did, and like later on, he signed something for him, and he wrote the line from that scene on the
Oh,
memorabilia, and
that's
I
amazing.
thought that was so cool. I was like, that's such a good idea. But yeah, so if you're getting something signed, have something in mind about what you want written in there.
Yeah, I love that story.
So if say obviously there's going to be people out there that are really smart, maybe a little bit unconfident or
Yes.
unaware that they could even publish a book. What was it for you that made you think, okay, I know enough about this subject matter that I want to put it into a book? And then what was the process?
Um, I think I reached a point in terms of the book that I wrote, Prep, Push, Pivot, through my work as a career coach and also through my own journeys that I realized not everyone has the opportunity to work with someone directly, whether it's a career coach one on one or whether that's a mentor who's really invested in you or a role model that's actually in your orbit that you can bounce ideas off. And sometimes we have those people in our lives and they're not always there all the time. You know, it might be someone that you've worked alongside for a period who really inspired you, or a teacher that you had that you still keep in touch with. And I realized that building your career is the most important and the most valuable investment you'll ever make. But it's also often the loneliest journey you'll ever have because no one else knows how your career feels. They can see on LinkedIn or on a resume or CV, you know, what you've done or what you're doing right now, but they don't know how that feels. They can't see what your potential is and what you want to do next. And I I realized I wanted to encapsulate the questions that I help address when I'm coaching, whether that's one on one or in group sessions, the questions that I had faced myself. And I wanted to harness all of those insights in a book that felt relatable and actionable and also could support underrepresented professionals who remain, you know, there's still so much that we're trying to strive for in terms of advancing our careers. And the further that we get, the more lonely it can feel. And so
Mm,
I really wanted to harness all of that. And there's always, you can look at it two ways. You could walk into a bookstore and see the thousands of books and be like, oh my gosh, okay, everything that could possibly be written about what I want to write about is there. Or you could look at it as, oh my goodness, there were like thousands of writers here who wanted to share something, and they did it. And I embraced the latter. And I wanted to just enjoy the journey. I wanted to see what it would feel like to create something. If I thought about how will I write 50,000 words, I probably would have been like, I don't know. But instead, I just broke it down in terms of what ideas did I have? What did I want to share? How did I want to structure that? And took it piece by piece. And it gradually built a momentum of its own. And then you start to get a little bit afraid of it. You're like, oh, am I doing it right? Is this the right direction? Is it not? And you can second guess and question a ton. And then nothing's ever going to be perfect. And even the things that you sometimes think are perfect, it might be the things that you underestimated that actually resonate the most. I often see on social media people quoting certain things back from my book, and I'm like, oh, I had no idea
Wow.
that part might touch someone, because we all consume and absorb things in different ways. And that's what has been such an eye-opening experience for me as well. And so don't wait for things to be perfect. They never will be. Just trust that if you are excited and exhilarated and committed to an idea, that will shine through. And you can perfect or refine or adjust as you learn more. And so, yes, and on that note, it was very hard for me after I received the first print editions of my book. I almost didn't want to open it because I'm like, oh my gosh, what if now when I look at it, I see something I'd want to do differently?
What if there's a massive spelling mistake on the first page?
Right. Well, one of the benefits of being traditionally published is that you have a great team that makes sure that part doesn't happen. But from a content perspective, and there are tiny things where I'm like, oh no, I see this. No one else would notice that I wanted it perhaps to be slightly different, or that I would do it differently. And that's life. There's always going to be things that you might want to do slightly differently if you had the time to do them over again, but you can channel that into your next project. So yes, it was a real personal growth process for me in becoming an author and sharing my work. And I think that's what has made it extra special, that I can help others, but it also, oh my goodness, transformed everything for me as well.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I think what really stood out to me there was that you just put your authentic self into the book, essentially.
Yes.
And that's what may have been a key to your success. So when people are reading it and interpreting it in different ways, it doesn't really matter, because you put in what you felt. And so everyone's going to have a different opinion. Everyone's going to have different experiences. I remember it reminded me actually of when I gave a speech for my dad, and I wrote it out, and people were laughing at parts that weren't meant to be jokes. And I was just like, okay, I didn't know that was funny. So, and that was a really interesting experience. And I was like, wow, you don't quite. I think the key is, as long as you put your heart into it, your authentic self into it, then it will resonate with somebody, and it might resonate in ways that you didn't predict, but it still will resonate.
Yes, exactly that. And you might not, you got the response in real time because you were delivering the speech, but people will be listening to your podcast maybe a year, 5 years after you've recorded it, and it will touch and resonate them, and they'll go and do something on the back of it. And you could never have imagined that in the moment when you recorded it. And that's the beauty of it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to share.
No, and that's another thing that really stood out to me about your story was the perception of perfectionism, because I think that can really haunt artists and content creators and anyone who's really ambitious about things they want to do. I often talk to people about how they can't finish something because it's not perfect.
Yes.
Did you feel like that? When you were writing your book, did you ever think that you didn't want to finish it because it hadn't covered everything, or were you quite content?
I went through a lot of just really sad feelings when it came to having submitted my manuscript. I and it was very unexpected to me because I kept thinking, I've got to meet these deadlines. I've got to get this done. It was like, I've got to do, it's like when you have that to-do list, right? I've got to move through all the things.
Mm,
And then I realized after I'd done it that, oh my goodness, Octavia, that was it. Your desire to be an author, that was it. The
mm,
writing and the creating and the refining. And you, and of course, I was thinking about the end book, the end holding it. But I realized at the end that it's the stuff that other people don't see, which is where the magic is. It's the parts that people didn't see, which is what made me an author, not necessarily the end product.
no,
Because that's how I honed my craft. That's how I figured things out. That's how I motivated myself. That's where I came up with ideas. That's where I was writing through the night sometimes, and I realized, oh my goodness, regardless of what comes after, that's the part. That's the part that made me. And I felt
yeah.
very sad in retrospect. That's feeling like, oh my gosh, you kind of missed that. You didn't realize that in the moment. You were so focused, laser focused on the minutiae of what you had to do. But I think that's human nature. We're not able to have that perspective always in real time because we're really focused on what we need to do and trying to get it right and trying to get it done on time and all of those things. So yeah, I went through so many emotions, and then I also felt a lot of guilt. I'm like, have I done enough for what comes next? No, I haven't, because I was so focused on the writing. So it's like that thing where we're constantly, once we're adults, we're constantly looking at what we haven't done, what's next on the
Mm.
to-do list. And I realize now with hindsight, I wish I'd held more time to just honor and celebrate the process of the creation, regardless of what I then needed to do when it came to sharing it more publicly. But that's with hindsight.
I think that's always going to happen, isn't it?
Yes.
I look back at my previous work and I think, man, I could have handled that better, or I could have written that better. And
Yes.
it's just like you said, you have to observe that and use it for future projects and just keep
Yes.
getting better and better and better. I mean, I've already watched some of my older podcasts and seen things that I've improved on because I'm like, okay, yeah, I've learned, like, don't do that, do this. That I like that, I don't
Yes.
like that, and that's going to happen. That's part of the journey, I think. And I never um, started this thinking, okay, I want it to be perfect. I started it because I thought it'd be fun and educational and interesting, and I got to talk
Yes.
to awesome people like you. I mean, that's really
Yes.
the main reason, was it gave me a good excuse to talk to really cool people. But I think that there's always going to be an element of us wanting things to be perfect and kind of striving for that level when we care about something. And I
Yes.
think as long as we've talked about this before, Octavia, the whole concept of um, one of the recommendations that speaking coaches give is to just be passionate about what you're talking about. Like, that's the number one thing. As long as you
Yes.
care about like what you're talking about, then someone else in the audience will also care about it, because they want to hear from people who are really passionate and have that kind of energy, that kind of charisma, and that, really care about it. So I think that's probably a piece of advice I think can translate across all crafts, really, isn't it?
Yes.
But
Yes.
where someone is, maybe they've got the idea for a book,
Yes.
what are the steps to be a successful published author?
Well, I think I just want to pause and say you have to define what success means for you
Yep.
and what it means for you personally, because what success means for me, Octavia Goredema, would be very different from what success would mean for any of the other authors that I love and read. And so you have to get really clear on what it means for you. And I love what you talked about why you created your podcast. And success for me is some of the experiences that I have, and I just love writing, and also the opportunity to put down on paper um, thoughts, ideas that can help someone else. And then the experiences that I have that I connected with that process are just priceless to me. And then there were some other things. I mentioned that the idea of my book being in a bookstore was a mind-blowing thing for me. So for me, just that happening was like, oh my gosh, there's actually nothing more that could come beyond that could top that. In addition to having had the opportunity and doing this, that success for me. Now, for someone else, it might be very, very different. And there's nothing wrong with it being different. You have to decide at the beginning what success means for you. And then I think you have to think about what support you might need along the way and
You talked about
making
this, didn't you?
sure.
Because in your
Yes.
story, you talked about how you spoke to a bunch of authors.
Yes. And it's other people who've done what you've done, but also other people who might have an insight or perspective on a component of what you're trying to do that can be helpful and beneficial for you. And I think also having someone to hold you accountable. That person doesn't have to be doing exactly the same thing as you or be someone that's done the same thing as you. It could just be someone who's prepared to check in with you and just ask a question and say, hey, Chris, you told me you're working on this. How's that going? How are you
You did
feeling?
this, didn't you?
Yes,
With somebody. I remember you telling me about this.
I
Share the
did.
story. It's really
I
cool.
did. So very early on in my journey to become an author for the book that is now published, Prep, Push, Pivot, probably took 3.5 years from start to finish, maybe 4. And very early in that process, a friend and I decided that we were going to meet every week and just do 20 minutes virtually and just check
Mm.
in, on the phone or on Zoom on how we were doing with our goal, what was working, what wasn't, how are we feeling. Um, and just that accountability and having someone who knew what I was working on just felt really encouraging. And I continue to have people hold me accountable. I have a friend now in New York who's holding me accountable on my next set of goals, and I'm doing the same for her because we're all so busy, Chris, and people aren't aware of what other people are doing. We have so much that we're navigating in our own lives with our work, with our responsibilities, with our projects, with our families. So being intentional about perhaps finding someone or more than one person, if you'd like that, who you can check in with and you do the same for them, can just be incredible. It means that you have someone that has your back, right? And who
Yeah.
you can share the details with, because there's so much that goes into a process, whether that's finding a job or writing a book or whatever, creating something. There's so much that goes into that process that is invisible to anyone else. And so that really helped me. And I can now see, with the benefit of hindsight, when I haven't had accountability partners for projects, sometimes I can do it myself, especially if it's something that's quick and easy to do. But for the things that really matter, makes a world of difference, especially when they're things that will take time to bring into the world.
I've read about this actually. The psychologists recommend having like a buddy system when you're trying to
Yes.
achieve anything for that accountability. So what you're saying is the first thing to be a successful author is to define what success looks like to you,
Yes.
and then to communicate with people or build relationships with people who've already done it and have some
Yes.
expertise that they can share to guide you,
Yes.
and then put an accountability partner in place.
Yes.
What's after that?
And then if you do those things and you take actions that move you closer towards what you defined in the first part, what success means for you, keep asking questions and problem solving as you go with the people who have done what you want to do or have insight into that, or an area of expertise that you don't have that you need. And then the third part, if you have someone who helps hold you accountable, how can you lose? It's impossible.
I love that. I love that. So and consistency is going to be really important, right? And that accountability is going to help with that consistency,
Yes.
because as soon as you start to like drop off, get distracted, you can have your accountability partner go, "Hey, how are you doing with progress on that project?" And you can be like, "Oh, I need to better get on that.
It's great for
Better get back on the
consistency,
wagon."
but it's also great for perspective and for celebrating the interim Milestones
Okay.
that might feel tiny but actually
Yeah.
really matter.
Yeah.
Because so often we rely on validation from others. Oh, like, Octavia, I saw you here. That's amazing. Or,
Mm.
well, yes, that dopamine hit feels really nice in the moment. But actually, what really matters is when you were really stumbling and you were struggling with something, but you did it and no one else saw because it wasn't anything that's visible to anyone else. It was like a really sticky part of the process for you. Your accountability partner will know. They'll know, and you can
Yeah.
celebrate that yourself and by telling them. And we have to remember those moments are just as important as the external validation that will come so much later down the road. And we have to make sure we hold space to recognize our progress, even if that progress is bumpy, even if it feels like it's slow, even if it feels like there's still so much further to go, because all the actions you're taking are building a momentum. They really are, even if it's not a perfect consistency and you're falling behind, perhaps on your timeline. Just keep pushing, talk it through, problem solve, get help when you need it, and you can't lose if you do those things. You just can't.
What would you say to someone who doesn't know what they want to do?
Oh, so I just had this conversation recently with someone. So it's a great question. And often it's because you're conflicted. And I think you have to dig deep into asking yourself questions about, if it's not what you want, if you're not certain on what you want to do, well, what do you know you don't want to do anymore? What are you ready to let go of? What excites you and energizes you? What could there be to potentially explore around those things? And you have to keep asking yourself questions. And then there comes a point where you have to make some preliminary decisions about things you're going to explore further. And once you do that, you then have to have the courage of your convictions to test something out and take actions towards that next step. And that's where a lot of people stop, because they're like, I don't know how this is going to go. None of us know how anything's going to go.
Absolutely. None of us have a crystal ball. I think that's
Yeah.
amazing, amazing advice, Octavia. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess what I've taken from that is I spend a good amount of time kind of journaling and writing down these kind of questions. I think what a lot of
Yes.
people do who might be going through that kind of feeling of confliction that you're talking about is that they haven't taken the time to do that, and they don't even know that that's necessarily a solution. They don't even
Yeah.
think of the idea of, maybe if I sat down and I wrote down like 10 questions about what I want to do for the rest of my
Yes.
life, that would make a difference. Because the thing is, it really does. It makes
Yes.
such a huge difference.
Yes, it really
And
does.
I
The
think,
answers are in there. And the person I was
yeah,
talking to was getting very frustrated with the questions and wanted the answer to be immediate. Like, well, you should tell me, what do you think? And that won't work, because we have to explore. And actually, the frustration part is actually really important, because it's a sign that things are ready to shift for you.
yes, 100% agree. I think you're clearly a really well versed coach, because you didn't take the bait of just telling someone what they should do and how they should do it, and you almost threw back like another question in a way.
Yes.
And I think that is so true. I think in today's kind of modern society, the way we live, the way
Yes.
we digest content, there's a lot of expectation around immediate gratification and immediate answers. We have
Yes.
at our fingertips, like you pick up a phone and you can ask a very complicated question and often get answers. But it's the
Yes.
really philosophical stuff that has to come from internal questioning.
Yes.
And you can't get the answers on the internet for
No.
that. You can get the answers of how to maybe figure that out,
Yeah.
but you cannot get, if I Google, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? I'd be interested what Google actually spits out. Maybe give me a wiki how on how to coach myself. But I think that's really is the first step. I
Yes.
totally agree with that. That it is really kind of a self-reflection piece. They're putting in the
Yes.
time to do that, and I don't think people do put enough time into themselves, do they?
They
Do
don't.
you
And
find
they're
that with like,
afraid. They're afraid also of the answers. and then they try
Some of
and
the
kind of
answers are scary.
filter the answers a little, or be like,
Yeah,
yes, but that's not
but
possible, or but that would be a dream, or that would, and they put caveats around things, and it all comes from a place of fear, and and it is scary because we wish there was a playbook that would tell us exactly how we can do X, Y, or Z, and it doesn't exist. We just have to
no,
be brave enough to take some steps, try some things out, get help, pick ourselves back up, try again. If we discover we hate it, that's valuable.
yeah, process of elimination.
Exactly. It's valuable. It's all
Yeah,
valuable.
yeah.
But you have to be ready to see that. And it's about having a growth mindset, in essence, about trusting that you can figure it out versus assuming that everything is fixed and unchangeable or impossible. And it takes a while to work through that.
I think that's so important to acknowledge. And so I think, anyone who's listening, who's thinking, how do I do something that Octavia's done? Or, how do I figure out what I want to do? That self-reflection piece is I think the best advice anyone could give. So thank you so much for sharing that, Octavia.
Oh, you're welcome.
I guess looking back, right, on that first stage of, defining what success is, that's
Yes.
basically you're taking the same approach to what we've just been talking about, right? It's just like the questions, like putting down the right questions of like, what do I want to do? What do I really enjoy? What does the world need? Whatever it might be, write down those questions, figure out what those answers are. You might not get it right straight away. I think in a previous conversation with you, we talked about how the the cause of persistence came from doing something that you really love, because if you don't love it, then you'll just give up when it gets really difficult, right? So you have to really enjoy it. And I see, and I talked about this on my podcast before with another guest of mine, where all these kind of um, get rich quick schemes are like popping up on YouTube and all this social media, and they're like, sell a bunch of stuff on Amazon and do this and start investing. And it's like, well, that's great if you love doing it, because
Yeah.
the first like 2 years of you doing it, you probably might lose money
Yeah.
until you start to see some return. But like, I think that's really important that you really care about it. Your next stage of talking about speaking with people who have that experience that they can share,
Yes.
who have that expertise, who can guide you. How do you approach that? Because I know for me, when I first like joined LinkedIn and thought about my career, I didn't really know what to say to people or who to speak to. So
Yeah.
there must have been an approach that you took to kind of build these relationships and kind of get these experts to feel, that they could give you valuable, that they would share their time, which is obviously incredibly valuable to them.
Yes.
How do you persuade experts and people who love what you do to actually take the time to sit down and talk you through
So
how to publish a book or do something else?
that's a great question. To the first part of that about just someone in general wondering about what to do, don't be afraid of starting career focused conversations, just in general. It doesn't even have to be with the person who has all the answers. It could just be with people who and you don't necessarily even have to know them extremely well. There was a study that was done by MIT, I think last year, and they looked at like 20 million LinkedIn profiles and found that most people actually found their next opportunity not by their immediate first degree connections or that immediate circle that you have and you might go to and tell, hey, I'm looking for a new job. It's actually the next layer beyond that. It's the people that other people know. And I
Interesting.
just had an example of that. Last year, a friend told me that he was looking for new opportunities, but, doing it gradually because he was in a role. Another friend told me the same thing. And they didn't know each other, but they kind of had similar personalities, not in the same industry. And I was like, I think I should connect them. And so I did. Well, guess what? My one friend just landed an insanely good new job from that new connection because
Amazing.
they had, I think, a phone call, maybe a couple of follow-up emails. And then when my one friend saw an opportunity became available that wasn't even posted, he thought of my other friend, recommended him. He had the interviews, got the job. So there's a perfect example of that coming to play. with regards to your question to me directly, I think you have to have the authenticity to reach out, but not be in a way that is real to you, but not be attached to the outcome. Right? Don't be attached to
Wow,
what comes next. So I give an
that's good
example.
advice.
One of my favorite books is Do More Great Work by Michael Bungay-Stanier. I think I've read that book 10 or 15 or 20 times. I love that book. And perhaps on the 10th reading or so, I realized right at the end, the author, Michael, had included, hey, if you have any feedback on the book, send an email here. And so I sent an email and just referenced how the book had helped me. And I think I had a question about one of the components. And I got a reply from Michael's assistant, who actually then set up a call for us. Could I ever have imagined that might happen? No, that wasn't my end goal. I wasn't reaching out asking for a meeting. I wish I'd never have done that just from that moment. But you just sharing authentically about what you're doing or how something has impacted you or what you admire about that person, or you just don't know where that might take you. If you then do get the opportunity to connect, be really respectful of that person's time, but also ask, how could I help you? Don't assume that because someone is further along in their journey than you, that they don't need help with something. And even if they can't think of anything in that moment, let them know that you'd like to help at some point if the situation arises. And know that paying it forward isn't just something that you do once you've made it. You can do that for others. You can recommend their work. There's all sorts of ways you can lend your support to that person also. And by default, most people want to help others. Yes,
Yes,
people might be busy, right? I can't help every single person who might ask me personally, but by default, we do want to help. And so I think remember that.
definitely. It's a lot of advice that I hear when it comes to kind of becoming successful is like make people aware of like what you want to do
Yes.
and share, make yourself visible is what they say,
Yes.
right? And there's a reason for that. I think a lot of people get a little bit afraid of that because they're like, I don't want to come across as like egotistical or like I'm showboating, and you're not. If you love what you're doing and you want to talk about it, and if there's people that you admire, there's role models out there,
Yes.
reach out to them and tell them what you think of their work because they
Yes.
will love that.
Yes,
And
I totally agree, Chris. And it's not just also, we are fearful of showboating, but then there's also a component that if you haven't done it yet, it can feel scary to say it out loud to people that know you. Like, and I know
yeah,
that before I became an author, but I was doing all the work, I'd tell people, oh, I'm writing a book, and they'd ask so many questions, which was great. But then it was also a little scary because it's like, but I haven't done it yet. I'm still working on it. And so I get that you might feel like, well, can I talk about it when I haven't done it yet? Well, here's the thing. You're only going to get to do it if you talk about it before you've done it. If you talk about
yeah,
what you're working towards, because otherwise you can't just operate in complete silence, in a completely alone stealth mode by yourself, and then ta-da, here I am. You like, chances are other people need to know so that they can make connections, perhaps recommend ideas for you. You can have sounding boards. It's just, you have to find the words to start conversations and ask other people. What are you interested in? What are you working towards? I remember doing that with a friend, and she turned to me and was like, no one's ever asked me that before. We don't have those conversations often, Chris, and we need to have them more.
definitely. I'm going to ask you a very important question that we ask
Yes.
everyone on the show, and that is, who have you helped and who helped you?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's a really hard one to answer because as a coach, my days spent helping people to do their best work. And I find it so rewarding because I don't think the people who I work with realize this, that helps me also. And I'm not just talking about transactionally in terms of me being paid. I'm talking about in terms of my growth and my development. Every single meeting that I have with someone where we're talking about their goals, working to the next steps for their goals, troubleshooting their goals, picking up the pieces where things haven't perhaps worked out the way that they wanted or celebrating progress, every single one of those conversations leaves me energized and leaves me with a perspective that I didn't have before. I'm forever thankful to have found work that fuels me in that way. Um, I'm forever thankful to the coaches that coach me and have coached me, and the mentors that have poured into me. Um, and it's just I'm so appreciative of all the people that have done that, more people than I could possibly name. And I firmly believe, the closing chapter of my book, Prep, Push, Pivot, is called Paying It Forward. And that's a principle that I just believe in. And I feel we can do that for one another, even with just incremental, small things to you could be monumental to someone else. Monumental. And so I sometimes hear people will say to me, "Oh, I heard you say this," or "Do you remember when you told me that?" And I don't necessarily remember it. But when they tell me the impact that that had, it's like, wow, you don't realize just how transformative it can be to have conversations with others.
I think that's a wonderful answer. That's why I love coaching so much.
Yes.
And I love being coached as well. I think
Yes.
that was having advice from my mentors and my the people that coach me, life-changing stuff. Honestly,
Yes.
it's so good to have. I think it's one thing that I wish I knew sooner was how to be a bit more humble and like ask for guidance and proactively seek someone out who could guide me in the right direction.
Yes.
And I think, everyone needs a good role model. Everyone needs advice from time to time. Um, I I love the idea of having coaches for different things. So
Yes.
like you might have like a fitness coach, a nutritional coach, a career coach. It is worth having like as many coaches as you can get. To be honest, obviously, not everyone can afford that.
Yes.
But there's definitely CMI do something really cool, Chartered Management Institution, where
Yes.
you can get coached by people for free, and there are
Wow.
there are resources that are out there. Um, but yeah, enough blogging about coaching. That's not me trying to get, get anyone to contact either of us, but I do think it's something that's really helped me as being coached, and also I feel the same way whenever I'm helping others. It does give you, it does energize you,
Yes.
it does like fill your. My friend would call this your soul jar. Put another soul
I
coin
love
into your soul
that.
jar. Um, but yeah, I think we've had a really wonderful conversation here, Octavia. I've really loved hearing your advice and your guidance. It's certainly things that I'm going to take on myself that I'm going to think about. Um, is there anything that you want to mention in terms of what you're working on now? What is next for Octavia?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I am doing more writing than I think I've ever done in the longest time, which I'm absolutely loving. So I have a weekly newsletter that I share out on a Sunday. I share it on Sundays because I know that's often the day where we're either dreading what's lying ahead for us at work or getting energized about what we're going to tackle. And so if you'd like to receive it, go to my website, octaviagoredema.com. I send it every Sunday. And I am embarking on a big new project, which I have an accountability partner for, and I'm lining up mentors and coaches for. And I'm really excited to be resetting my goals and thinking about what the next year can bring. And I love this conversation as well. Thank you so much, Chris, for the invitation.
You're welcome. And where can people find your stuff, Octavia?
Oh, so if you go to my website, octaviagoredema.com, you can see all the things that I've done recently and also stay in touch via my weekly email that I send out on Sundays. If you're on LinkedIn and you listen to this conversation, send me a connection request and let me know that you listened. I'd love to hear that. I'm always on LinkedIn, so if you reach out to me, I will see it. And so, yes, my website and LinkedIn is the best place to find me.
And also your stuff, you've got stuff on Amazon as well. So
Oh, so
Audible, right?
yes. So yes, if you have Audible, you can find my series, How to Change Careers with Octavia Goredema there. You'll also find my book, Prep, Push, Pivot, there, which is available as an audiobook if you want to listen to it, or as a hardcover, or as a Kindle. But you can also find Prep, Push, Pivot at your favorite bookstore as well.
Octavia, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you, Chris.